Okay, gonna give it one more minute because I know that there are a ton of people trying to get in. These numbers are gonna keep going up, and then we'll kick things off. Awesome. Let's rip in. Let's rip in. So, cool. Good to see everyone. Super excited about this today. Lots of interest in it. We had something like 150 or 180 people RSVP of some crazy amount. So clearly just like a hot button topic. I'm super passionate about it because I think about not only the power of a career ladder for externally, like for yourself to figure out where you want to go, but also even for me as an employer. You know, we've got 30 odd people here at Great Question. And I think about how I can empower everyone in the company to figure out what do they need to do to go and get to that next level, and what does it actually mean, and comp philosophies and things like that. Just the common sort of career conversations we're having. So in this session, we're going to be exploring the creation and insights that Drillbit Labs have gone and drawn in their data-driven career ladder for UX researchers. So you can understand more about like why did you do this, and how did you do it, and what actually came in, and then what did you learn, and what can everyone take away from it. So I'm hoping that you're going to get an understanding of the landscape of UX research careers, and so particularly relevant for folks that are looking to advance in your role, and hiring managers looking to create better structure for their teams and things like that. Um, so it should be super exciting. So thank you for joining us, Thomas Stokes and Lawton Pybus from Drillbit Labs. Thomas and Lawton have been working together obviously for quite some time, and in this particular case, compiled data from over 14,000 UX research job descriptions, and can share some of those learnings. So thanks for joining us, Thomas and Lawton.
Thanks for having us, Ned. It's always good to chat, and I guess we just have a few hundred more people than in our normal conversations. Yeah,
Exactly. Just there's flies on the wall.
cool. Yeah, let's get into it.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. Maybe you both could start by giving us a quick intro about yourselves, and then maybe what motivated you to explore this, and what gaps you're looking to solve.
Yeah, thank you, Ned. Again, really excited to be here. So, for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Lawton Pybus. I am co-founder of Drillbit Labs. So, both Thomas and I have backgrounds in human factor psychology. That's kind of an academic sister to UX research. So, I'm sure we'll talk on that a bit later when we get into like the educational requirements and things like that. But I've spent the last number of years in UX research, specifically consulting and strategy. So I'll just say a few words about Drillbit Labs, what we do, pass it over to you, Thomas. So we're a UX re
E o seu comprovante de renda, tá?
Oh, I'm on it.
Thanks, Ned. Yeah, we're a UX research and digital strategy consulting firm. We work side by side with product teams, UX research leaders. And our goal is really just to help teams enhance their digital strategies, improve their user experiences, and ultimately achieve better business outcomes. So we do that a couple of ways. One is our research projects. We empower teams to make data-driven decisions. But we also offer advisory services to help you get to the next level of UX maturity, refine your UX processes. And we also provide live training courses that equip team with research skills and continuous improvement. Over to you, Thomas.
Yeah. Hey everybody, it's good to meet you all. I'm Thomas, also co-founder and principal at Drillbit Labs. So naturally, I lead user research projects and digital strategy for clients across various industries. But the other element of Drillbit that I'd like to highlight is Lawton and I are both very passionate about sharing knowledge with the community. In particular, we co-author a newsletter called Depth by Drillbit Labs, which is, I suppose, kind of the source material for a lot of what we're going to be talking about in the webinar today. Real quick, I'll launch into the motivation behind creating the data-driven career ladder, but I also want to acknowledge that one of our collaborators on the project, his name is Brian Utesh. He is a senior manager of UX research at Cisco. just wanted to mention we've got a collaborator who is
Mhm,
not with
mhm.
us today, but wanted to make sure that if anyone was interested in kind of looking up more about the work, they know that he is one of our main collaborators. Now, in terms of building this data-driven career ladder, the rationale, I guess the main motivating driver behind it was that there's a clear opportunity that we saw. It was a real lack of clarity in the UX community about career progression that affected both individual contributors. So individual contributors, researchers in the industry would struggle to gauge their qualifications against what's normal, say for someone at their level. And then organizationally, we also saw that, for example, a manager on a UX team might struggle to define the levels, like what's an entry level, mid, senior on their team and what their qualifications and responsibilities should be. So what we did was set out to create a data-driven, company-agnostic career ladder so that we could outline what the competencies, responsibilities, qualifications are at those various levels so that we could essentially provide some benefit to the community. Those job seekers might navigate their careers much more confidently. Those leaders and organizations might be able to set roles and expectations that are, grounded in real data, right? So that's the main motivating factor behind the research that we'll talk about today.
Love that.
Real quick, I'd add to that, if you dig around online, you're going to find UX researcher career ladders, and there's even some people like Brian, our collaborator. He'd done some prior research collecting data from job descriptions. But we see this as the first data-driven career ladder because we're sort of combining those two approaches in past research where, we actually took a lot of job descriptions and analyzed them to extract what a kind of company agnostic career ladder would look like.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you. First of all, thanks for the work. Such a long time fan. If anyone's not subscribed to the newsletter, definitely go and do that, and we'll throw a link into the chat. I'm always just amazed at the volume and quality of the content you all put out. It's really amazing. And I'll also introduce myself. For folks that don't know, I'm the co-founder and CEO of Great Question. And so Great Question, we're putting on this content here today. We put out a bunch of webinars. We've got a bunch coming up, including with folks like Pedro Vargas and Kate Towsey about how to demonstrate impact in research. And Great Question is the all-in-one customer research platform that combines the industry-leading research CRM to recruit and manage a panel of your own customers, or recruit from non-customers via partnerships with the respondent, with all the methods, surveys, prototype tests, and customer interviews, and a research repository to store and share everything you're learning all in one place. And that's probably the last you'll hear about me ranting about Great Question for now. Cool. So yeah, let's rip into the data. I'm happy to throw something up on the slides if it makes sense. You direct me. But yeah, what can we learn from what's the takeaway here from these descriptions?
Yeah, so just to set the context here, what we did essentially, like Lawton said, some of the previous efforts to define the UX research role were maybe based off a little bit of data or just some anecdotal observations. Our objective really was to define a very large data set of UX roles that we could draw from across various levels. So we created this method where we were able to use an API to draw job postings from the web. They've got a lot of information about, qualifications, what you do during the job. And then we used Python, various coding essentially, so that we could wrangle those about 1,400 job postings that we took and created over 350 different categories that had variables like seniority, qualifications, responsibilities, things like that, to create a robust data set. And so what we did with that data set, because it's huge, right? It's over 300 columns, over 1,400 rows. We simplified that into a kind of a single visual career ladder that, if we want, we can throw that one up. I think it's number 1 in our slides that we've got for the day. So this is just like a visual that we can share with folks that very briefly summarizes a mountain of data, but we also kind of explored and elaborated on the analysis that went into this simplified visual that we've got here on the screen now into a series of 3 different articles. on depth. So Lon, I don't know if you want to kind of start to dive into maybe some of the more interesting or surprising things that we found through this exercise.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about a typical job hunt and if you're looking for job postings, it kind of starts with the titles, right? And you've got to punch something in to get
Mm.
results back. And, if you've been in this field for a while, you know that we like to use a lot of different names for it. Could be UX researcher, product researcher, um, experience researcher. So UX researcher was the most popular title that we found. We tried a couple different ones. And I mean, even just from the results, right? You start to get some interesting findings about locations and salaries, things just from the job descriptions themselves. I'll throw one out there that, folks are really looking for remote work these days. I think we've come down a lot from the highs, but we're still looking at about 50% remote these days. Now, some of those are probably hybrid, but there's still a large opportunity for remote work. So that was one thing that was a little surprising to me.
Mm.
Yeah, and I'll
Uh,
even oh, sorry, Ned, you go ahead.
no, please go. Yeah, no.
I'll call out another finding that I thought was a little surprising. So, orienting to this career ladder that you see in front of you, obviously you have various seniority levels across the very top band and then kind of different categories of information below them. Even just focusing on the levels for a second. Carly, if you want to go to slide 2, I'll actually highlight the data here. So, this is what the frequency data of those various job levels were. So
Mm.
when we're going out and collecting different job roles that we see available, this is what the actual distribution was across seniority level. Now, I kind of thought going into this, and Lawton, I know you did too, that maybe the mid-level would be the most common role, but exactly how frequent it was compared to other seniority levels to me was surprising. Like over 50% of roles in our data set were mid-level roles. And you can see here senior levels also pretty common, but all other seniority levels were 5% or less of the total sample. So while surprising that it's that strong of effect, it's maybe not surprising that mid would be the most common. So that's, I don't know, that's what I find most surprising. Ned, what do you think's interesting about all this, or where should we
I
kind of
mean,
take things from here?
there's a couple of things here, and then we can sort of move on. But I'm curious to understand how this stuff changes over time. Like if we were to go and look back to 2021, what would actually be the spread? Would people be looking for more seniors and senior directors and things like that? Um, and so how has the economy shaped the distribution that we've got here? But also looking forward, if we go into 5 years into the future, how will this change, especially in light of AI and agentic researchers effectively? Are we going to see a push for more very, very senior folks? I think the other thing that was interesting to me, and it's interesting to me in a lot of different roles, not just in UX research, is the split of years of experience, right? Where, for a manager, if we go back to the previous slide, you've got, 6.8 years is the experience. And there's probably some limitations in the methodology you've got here, but we should come back to. But, 7 years experience, you're getting paid 140 to 210K. That's a pretty big band. But actually, if you were to be a lead with more experience than that, you're going to get paid less. And that kind of makes sense, right? Management responsibilities and things like that. And your head is on the chopping block, and far greater responsibility. But it's some of those discrepancies I think are interesting. Maybe that is a nice segue into. I would love to understand what are the limitations of this methodology, because I imagine some of this data you maybe don't have because you don't know, like, well, actually, I said this was the range, but actually this was the range. And this is who I ended up hiring. And this is actually how I thought about years of experience. Because I know that, I spent a lot of time on our job descriptions, but sometimes it's not until I get quite to the end stage that I actually make a decision.
Yeah, I think that's a great question.
You got
it
me.
always comes up eventually, doesn't it? Yeah, no, with the data set being job descriptions, you're right. It's kind of the in-demand characteristics rather than the like observed characteristics of folks in the job market, right? So you could imagine situations where there are kind of deltas between what is said in a job description and what is maybe self-reported from people in the role. We did compare a lot of what we found in our data set to maybe whatever publicly available information we had, where people maybe self-reported their, for example, salary level. So we looked to see if we're generally in the same range. And for the most part, we found relatively similar data. So that was encouraging. But the other element of this, and I think this is maybe more pertinent to where we are right now with this project, we saw the different essentially sample sizes of each of these roles. So we're most confident at the mid and senior level that we found pretty good benchmarks. Things like principal and up, there were relatively few observations. So as we continue to collect data, because we've built a mechanism where we can just keep on adding to this data set, as we continue to collect, we might get more confident in our estimates and these benchmarks at the other levels where we just didn't have the same amount of data as those more common seniority levels like senior and mid.
Yeah, awesome.
I'll jump on there with a few more caveats as you interpret all the data that we're sharing here today. The first is that this is US based. That was a limitation of the API that we're using to collect job descriptions. It'd be great in the future to see how this holds up around the world, especially in like Europe, England, and APAC. But another that I would add is, some of this data is inherently a little messy. So like the salary data, that's not a standard requirement. There are some US states that do require it, but there are still a lot of job descriptions today that don't put a salary range in there. And I've often seen, folks on LinkedIn kind of complain about the salary ranges they're seeing. Oh, this is a huge range, and it depends on your experience, right? So the fact that what we got here came out so cleanly, right? That you do see a pretty steady progression as you go up in seniority. That was actually a little surprising to us, and I think that it's a good signal. In addition to converging with sort of self-report data, like Thomas mentioned, that this is a somewhat reliable method for getting this kind of information.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I don't want to touch on the debate about whether or not every job should have a price attached to it or a range. Hot button topic. I know that's the law of the land in Colorado, right?
It is, yeah. A few other states too. I think Washington and maybe New York. But yeah, it'll probably become more and more common.
I believe that. Yeah. Just jumping on quickly questions on, and we'll move on in the chat. And forgive me if this was already discussed, but Sam Cart asks, what's the time frame on this data?
Yeah, we collected data I think it was the tail end of 2023 through about April 2024. So about 6 months there, right?
Which is another thing to bear in mind with this. Ned, you asked about the market and the economy. That was a fairly large snapshot of time, but it is a snapshot in time. It's not, pre-pandemic, tech bubble. It'd be great to collect that over time and see how that affects things as well.
Awesome. I also want to know if maybe we can pinpoint when Teresa Torres's Continuous Discovery Habits book was released. And I think the rest of the questions we're probably going to answer moving forward. How do you account for when there's a difference in companies? For example, an IC4 at Meta, it sounds like we haven't really got that granular in an IC4 type role. But yeah, maybe you've got a high-level answer on that one from Christine.
Yeah, so I guess there could be multiple different questions within that, or multiple different intents in the question. So I'll try to answer both. One is like, how do you account for the fact that different companies call the same thing different levels? And fortunately, even the numbers, like 4 matches up with a seniority level. Those are just Radford numbers. So fortunately, we can map those to senior, etc. Then there's the question of how do you account for the fact that maybe at the same qualifications. So I've got this resume, I'm a lead at this company, but this other company considers me as mid-level, right? Like they've got different standards. We don't. That's kind of averaged out. Part of the beauty of this is that it is company agnostic. It's just taking what's a lead here across all different companies that we can observe and putting together. This is representative of what a lead typically is across the industry. So hopefully that answers whatever the intent behind the question is.
Yeah, great. That's helpful. We use, for what it's worth, I love Radford. So expensive to go and get access to it. We use pave.com internally, which has been great. Doesn't have as a complete a picture as Radford, but it solves for our need and stage. Cool. All right, let's keep going. I'm going to come back to these questions. Harry, I might get you to help me collate these to get them answered. But yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about, how do you envision the career ladder actually being leveraged by job seekers and or by managers? Like, what can I do with this?
Absolutely. Lawton, you want to take this one or should I go? I know I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, I think for a job seeker, maybe you can address the manager part of that, Thomas. But for a job seeker, I think that this should really help you in your job search and knowing where to apply. So you have a resume, you have a set of experiences and qualifications. If you can kind of hold yourself up to this, that gives you a general idea of what level of a role you should be applying for. I was actually helping somebody out last week who, just looking over her resume, she was trying to move into a more senior role. And so one thing that we did together was we tried to take a look at how the responsibilities and achievements that she was highlighting match up with a senior level job description. So let's say you're in a mid-level role and you're trying to move up. Maybe you can use this to highlight the right experiences. I'd say one other thing, just kind of long-term career planning. You may be really early on. Maybe you're just trying to get your first internship, but this can give you the wide picture of everything that you might want to, focus your career on. So just starting now, I'm thinking, okay, 10 years from now, that's something that I'm going to want experience in. So just having that in the back of your mind and opening up yourself to those possibilities, I think is going to be helpful.
Yeah, and I'll yes and that. Just last week, I actually went into a university program to speak with, it was a human factors program, just to speak with the students. And this came up. And essentially the question was, hey, once I'm done with graduation, like what type of jobs can I apply to? Because the truth is, straight out of graduation, it might be the fact that you are actually qualified for a senior level role. I think I saw someone in the chat mentioning, yeah, I had success actually placing PhDs directly into senior level roles. So like you say, Lawton, it can help you gauge maybe a range of possible outcomes of like what type of roles you might be best suited for in your job search. But like you mentioned, managers on research teams can use this sort of as like a starting point for creating their job levels and descriptions. So what we've come up with here is a starting point. It's step 1. Step 2 is a job analysis. So our ladder gives you a starting point, like I said, but next, what you can do as a manager is analyze your current ways of working on your team, whether that be surveys, interviews with the current team, or other methods to learn more about their day-to-day. You can use that information to refine the career ladder that we have to base it on basically the feedback you're getting from your team about what it's specifically like to be a UX researcher at your organization. Through that, you've got the ability to clarify what the expectations are from your specific org and tailor this information a little bit more towards what's most accurate. for you. So it kind of helps with the blank page problem, and then you can refine specific elements of it to create the levels in your org.
Yeah, that's great. I think for me personally, I know that when I, started my first grad role, or in effect a grad role, and I got my salary and I was like, wow, this feels like so much money, when really, you're like, you don't see what the potential is. And what it means to be in these higher realms. And I think that's relevant because you're locking into career here, and you're like, there are other options here, right? There's opportunities to step into product management roles, or other things that are interrelated around this. Maybe it's market research. And so understanding what you're signing up for, what you're committing to, what's compounding here, I think is really important, especially for those folks just entering the industry, from experience.
Yeah, that's well said.
Cool. So just going through my questions here, my discussion guide. Maybe we can talk a little bit about, the insights that can help inform our understanding of career progression in UX research. Did more of that in terms of these responsibilities, moving on to this responsibility section here. Yeah, let's rip into that.
Yeah, well, and you want to tell folks how we came up with these 4 sets of responsibilities, and maybe we can go through them and how they're changing over seniority.
Right. Yeah. So going back to our method, right? We took a ton of job descriptions. The responsibilities section is very common, right? So as we were going through these and looking at all the individual responsibilities that were named, we broadly classified them into these 4 groups. So that's executing research, hands-on research, work around the research, collaboration with non-UX research roles, and then moving into more mentorship, people management, leadership skills. I'll touch on the first 2. So hands-on research, executing, that's pretty easy. When you think about a UX researcher, that's probably what you have in mind. So early on, you're going to see a lot of diversity of methods, early on, you're going to see a focus on specific methods, such as usability testing, in-depth interviews with users, surveys. And then as you progress, you're going to see more of a diversity of methods. So this is where people start to specialize. Maybe you're going to become a quantitative UX researcher. So you want to learn, R and Python and get really good at meshing data with A/B tests and things like that. So really having that diversity of tools in your toolkit become more important as you progress. And then that second point, the work around the research, that's obviously kind of a vague term. We didn't actually come up with it, but what we mean by that is the work that facilitates the research, the things that make it more logistically possible and impactful. So this could be setting up research operations. It could be different systems and processes, just to make research easier across the organization. Early on, obviously, that's not so important. You're probably inheriting those from the team. As you progress, senior individual contributors and especially managers are going to focus on enabling others to do that research.
Yeah, and I'll talk about the second 2 for you here. Like you said, Lawton, right? There's a lot more to do with making sure research at an organization is effective than just doing the research. There's all the work that goes around the research. So I suppose that's where the kind of term work around the research came from. But next in these responsibilities, the last 2 categories you see are collaboration with non-UXR roles and mentorship and people management. Taking those 2 in turn, first, if you look at the collaboration with non-UXR roles, you see it's just high across the board. And the truth is, all work is cross-functional to an extent, right, gentlemen? Just who you work with will change slightly. If you're interested in kind of reading up more about the different roles and how they change in terms of who a researcher works with at the entry level versus a manager level, you can read, I think it's part 3 of the 3-part series on depth, but just for example, generally early, we see that researchers will collaborate a lot with design and dev. Later on, maybe higher level principal or even people leadership roles, you'll see that they end up collaborating more with folks in other leadership capacities to more strategically plan what UX and research should be doing at that organization. So the main takeaway there, right? Communication skills are important. Being able to work cross-functionally with people who don't have the shared language and shared background with you is important at each level. Just specifically who you'll work with day to day will change a bit. Then we get on to another people-related concern, mentorship and management. The takeaway here is that generally, at some point, all folks are expected to lead other researchers, but the exact scenario that happens in will change a little bit. Early on, you'll be getting mentored, like intern, entry level, mid-level even. You'll be more receiving mentorship from other researchers. But later on in your career progression, you might decide to take one path, which is going to management. Obviously, at that point, you'll have formal management responsibilities. You'll have direct reports. However, even if you decide to stay in like the individual contributor route and advance that way, we see that a lot of folks actually still carry mentorship responsibilities. In fact, in our data set, we identified that from senior level and above, senior leads, principals, et cetera, over 50% of them had some sort of mentorship associated with their job descriptions. It's something that they're expected to do. And that can be even very formal. It can be situations where it's defined that they'll work as the lead on all their research projects, but they'll always have a support researcher, maybe someone who's a little bit more junior in the organization that they'll get hands-on training and experience with. So the main takeaway there is, in addition to like our technical research skills, obviously those leadership skills will come into play. It's just a matter of whether or not you'd like that to be more mentorship, kind of helping out other ICs on the job, or formal management in the more people leadership route. So by studying these changes of those 4 different kind of categories of responsibilities, we can really frame up how a role really feels different and what's truly unique as one maybe moves throughout different stages of kind of career progression.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'm curious, and seeing this a little bit in the chat as well. Did you see much mention of things around research operations? That's one topic, is like, an expectation of, doing the executing research, also including the recruitment and the guardrails and things like that, but also the collaboration with non-UXR roles and maybe democratization. Like, was that even a term that people are using in these kind of job descriptions, or an expectation of supporting non-researchers to, distributing insights to non-researchers as one form of democratization, or empowering them to conduct research? Anything that you dug up there on?
Yeah, Ned, I would say like everything you just said, we would lump under the work around the research. So in general, those are the kinds of responsibilities that become more important as you progress. I think someone asked specifically about research operations roles, where that's your dedicated focus. And again, this is one of those areas where, given the timing and the sample size we're able to collect, we don't have a great view into specific insights for that title. But yeah, this is something that researchers will be expected to do.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh yeah, kind of awesome, I guess, depending on your perspective. Great. Okay. And so, maybe you could talk a little bit about some of the common misconceptions about the transition from individual contributor to management roles. I think the big thing that comes to mind for me is, I think there should be opportunities to continue to excel as an IC, and can see changes and improvements in your salary and benefits without needing to become a manager, because I don't think everyone should become a manager. I think that, I think it is such a particular skill set and role and experience, and there's not always opportunities for it as well. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll go ahead on one thing, Lawton. I'm sure you've got more to add. This is just very present in my mind because I just spoke on it a bit. But one common misconception that we had with when discussing these findings with folks was that only managers are expected to lead or mentor other UX researchers, right? As we just saw and we see here, generally as you advance in your career, you'll be expected to take on some sort of mentorship. Like we said, over 50% of folks senior level and above that are individual contributors have mentorship responsibilities. But Lawton, I think you might even highlight the better point about like, it's not just entering management that's the way to progress. There's other routes to kind of advancing seniority in your career.
Yeah, thanks for teeing that up, Thomas, because whenever we talk about this work and I fail to make this point, I feel like I've lost the whole session. But I don't want anyone to get the impression that because we have all of this on one slide, this is a unidirectional career ladder, and that you're gonna hop from intern up to principal and then switch into it's definitely not a single path. You might think of these as two parallel career ladders, or maybe a fork in the road. But the decision, it's going to be a personal one, right? It's not necessarily going to be, I want to be in a position where I can influence, UX research in my company, where I can mentor others. Like, you're going to be probably doing both, in either role, but it is more about your own personal career goals and what your own aptitude is, because as a manager, you're going to be a lot more focused on some of those activities, as well as the other typical operational stuff like setting career development goals and whatever else that you have to do as a manager, just to keep the lights on.
So I'm curious on the junior researcher side, coming into this, like how can they best prepare themselves for this stuff? And I think about this again from my lens of a new grad. You're talking about some of these things like collaboration. How do you learn those skills? Maybe you sort of highlighted this a little bit, but should be thinking about starting this intern or entry level, or actually are there ways to accelerate through some of these paths? And then finally, I think you talked about your own personal career goals, and it is so personal. How to think about even defining those and coming up with those. And I know some of this is getting outside of the data side of things. It's more career development, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what we can draw from the data is, again, those big three methods. So usability testing, user interviews, and surveys. If you can tailor your application materials, your resume, your case studies, whatever you have, to show that you have a pretty rock solid, at least basic understanding of that, that's going to help you make the case that you're ready to jump into this role. You asked about collaborating and showing that, especially as an intern. I mean, there are ways you can do this. If there's any group work that you were a part of in your studies or as a part of another role, one thing I like to recommend to people, in kind of private mentorship chats, is get plugged into a apprenticeship group that's working for a good cause. Someone that's volunteering their time, their energy, their skills to maybe do some of these things for a nonprofit. And that'll give you not just some hands-on experience practicing these things, maybe working with a team, but it's volunteering your time and doing something good for the world. So one that I like to recommend, it's called Tech Fleet. Can put that in the chat so people can look that up. But that's a group of people, again, apprenticing and volunteering their time. Thomas, did you have anything else to add to that?
Just one. So I'm thinking about someone, very early in their career. Maybe they're still getting their education. One thing that I like to advise, because when they'll look at these responsibilities, they'll be like, oh, work around the research, collaboration with non-UXRs. How can I get this before I kind of, get my first role? It's not completely impossible. It just looks a little bit different. So with this, I mentioned last week, I was chatting with a group of students. One thing that we talked about was how to get kind of experience with these different responsibilities, aside from just executing on the research. And for example, one of the things that we discussed was, hey, you kind of run a little research lab here on campus. It's very cool. It's very academically focused, but there's a lot of work that goes into helping your lab operate correctly. So while it's not UX research in industry, you're actually learning a lot of research ops if you take a sort of leadership role in this student volunteer research. So you can start to position that as a sort of high level. The general skill is still the same. You just need to kind of position that as such when you're going out and applying. So I like to try to take the encouraging stance that while it might look different, there's ways to exhibit and build these skills even while you're still, getting your education.
Yeah, that's awesome. And employers are hungry for these kind of signals, right? They want to know, they want to hear this stuff that you might not think is important, but they're like, oh, wow, that actually means a lot for me. It's a big signpost that you're proactive, you really care about this, are passionate, you're doing it your own time. And yeah, taking on leadership roles for things that the organization might even not even know that they need help with around the research ops or whatever. That's great.
Yeah.
And so I guess final question or penultimate question before we're going to rip into the Q&A side of things. I want to make sure we've got plenty of time for that because they're coming thick and fast. This chat is just blowing up, which is awesome. But would love to understand, like, what advice do you have for organizations looking to better define these roles and responsibilities in their research team? And I think some of this comes down to even those leveling guides, right, that exist within this, which are a little bit separate to the job description stated levels.
Yeah, Lawton, I know I kind of mentioned this a bit earlier, right? Where I said, like, this is kind of step one. Step two for a specific org is that job analysis. But I don't know, maybe you've got a few ideas of the things that we'll typically say to folks who are doing that job analysis, like the advice that we give once you get to that step and you're kind of using this to like define one's organization's actual levels and responsibilities.
Right. Yeah. I mean, think of these as benchmarks, right? These are, again, company agnostic. It doesn't take into account your situation. Obviously, there are larger policies at place, usually put in by HR, your people team, what those levels generally look like throughout the organization. So, you can't just go in and say, all right, we're going to add 6 new levels to the UX researcher track. You have to harmonize it with what you have. So, there's a certain amount of tailoring and customization that you're going to have to do, as well as looking at your situation and what are the researchers on your team actually responsible for. Maybe you have a very qualitative team. Maybe you have a very quantitative team. Maybe you're working in a very specialized niche space. So there's going to be specific skills that may not highlight here exactly. So look at this as a starting point and then, tailor it to what you're trying to do. And that's something that Drillbit Labs would love to help with if you're looking for that. I guess one other thing I would add, if you do have any flexibility in it, I think, the more rungs that you have on your career progression ladder is generally better. People like to have a sense of progression in their lives. And again, this is not from the data. This is just my own personal opinion. But I think that giving people that sense of progress may actually help with employee retention. So something else to consider.
And once you actually start using that career ladder, use it. We've seen teams implement it and then kind of never return back to it. Development conversations throughout the year and reviews whenever you do them during the year should center, at least in part, on your career levels and expectations. If you put them out there, your employees will use them. So make sure that they're kind of part of conversations throughout the year. It's something that should be a quick doc that everyone probably looks at decently often.
Awesome. I'm going to switch to Q&A mode now, so we've got enough time to get through this. Corey Feith asks, how can most roles be for mid-level? Is there an industry trend of down leveling in a saturated market, or is this just what companies actually need? Great question.
It is. Oh, there's a lot at play there, isn't there,
Mm,
Lawton? Like, it's by default what we'd expect. It's a little bit easier to hire mid-level than entry-level because they require less training. It's easiest to justify headcount for. You can, it's kind of like this just sweet spot where it's kind of the easiest thing to hire for, and you can find a lot of qualified candidates who apply to it. But I don't know, Lawton, are there other things at play there?
I think you hit most of them. The only thing I'd add is, from a budget resourcing perspective, a mid-level gives you a lot of bang for your buck, so to speak. If you looked at our salary data there, there's a lower investment for the company at that point. So yeah, there may be some market pressures as well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be looking interesting to look again at the next sample of this data to see how this changes over time. Because yeah, to the point, is there an industry trend of this down leveling? We are seeing that in other sectors, right? We are seeing this in the removal of mid-level management and more senior talent, partly from an economic perspective, but also for philosophical reasons and rah-rah. So I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Peter Lutz asks the billion-dollar question: any speculation about how AI will impact this? Corey Feith also commented on that. Matt Bean has done some research on how AI is enabling senior expert knowledge workers to not need apprentices. But would love to hear, from you two, how you think AI is going to impact this.
I've got one thing I want to say, Thomas. You might have something else, but
I do.
we actually did look into this. It was one of the search terms that we were trawling through all these job descriptions, trying to see, is ChatGPT coming up? Maybe some other tool? Are they actually calling out AI research tools? And I think there were a handful, but it wasn't enough to make the map at all in our overall findings. This is one area where I hope that we come back to this in a few years and we're able to take this as a benchmark and see if that's starting to crop up about a lot more.
Yeah, you stole the words right from my mouth. I remember we were looking through the data and we were like wondering what tools might come up most frequently. And not a single AI tool was even mentioned. Anywhere where it was mentioned was few. I think there were single digit numbers where we saw someone say something along the lines of the ideal candidate would have familiarity with implementing AI in research processes, which is kind of funny for like where we are and when we were collecting our data, because it's like best processes around something that we're not really sure what the best processes are yet. Cool. So that was really it. So I expect next time that we revisit the data set, because we're continuing to collect data as we speak, that might be something that'll change and maybe we'll have more clarity around. But I think that'll be one of those slow-ish moving variables that we'll start to see over time.
Yeah, I think from my experience, I'm not seeing tools often mentioned in these kind of job descriptions. Is that something that you felt as well, or yeah?
I think the minority of job descriptions actually even mention tools, and even the ones that we saw, right? Like they were very different than what we were likely to see if we had done this analysis 5 years ago, and it'll be different than if we do this analysis again in 5 years. I think like Figma was the number one tool, wasn't it, Lawton? It was like most frequent of the ones that we saw.
Yeah,
Yep,
and
awesome.
that's an interesting one because we're researchers, right? We're not usually designing prototypes or anything in Figma, but it does come up a lot, especially in terms of like, hey, you're going to be working with designers and you're going to be testing prototypes in Figma. So it makes sense in
Makes
that
sense.
context.
Yeah, awesome. Abby asks, do you have any data or insights on how this path would change for someone transitioning from another field like marketing or HR, who obviously wouldn't match the experience data for like the 0 to 1 UXR path, but might not start at an entry level? Yeah, any thoughts on that?
Well, and if you have an immediate answer, feel free to take this one. I'm chewing on this one for a second.
I don't recall, any data-driven findings where we saw, oh, this other career path is being mentioned a lot in job descriptions.
Yep.
What we would have is, and we touched on this a little bit, were the educational paths that people take into the field. And, you know, a lot of the big three were psychology, human factors, and human computer interaction. So, you know, that's not a career, but if you were, say, in college still, you know, maybe a freshman, and you're like, oh, I really want to be a UX researcher someday, those would be the three that we'd say this will give you the strongest theoretical basis and shot for getting in.
Final question I've got for you all is what's gonna come from this next? What's the next progression for you in your UX career ladder progression thing? Are we gonna see more comp data? Are we gonna go expand out into UX research operations? Or is there something else that you wanna, where's this gonna metamorphose into?
I'll start by saying that the questions we're getting, this discussion here today, is helpful to us. Admittedly, this is almost like a very strange form of research for us to start to answer that question. What should we be doing with it next? I know we've got a few initial ideas. I'll throw a couple out there. Lawton, you do the same, but it was a great data set, pretty large, 1,400, but once we start to cross and cut our data sets, those sample sizes don't look as great. So as we add more data, I can imagine that there are going to be certain things that we look at and compare that we just didn't have enough information for the first time. So how this changes by company size or industry would be a great example. But even so, I think as we revisit this, we haven't decided when we'll kind of republish and update and see what's changed. But I imagine there's a number of variables we'll look at to try to think through, like, okay, how has the market shifted?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a big one, is revisiting this over time and seeing what changes. There are a couple of near-term additions to this, maybe in the next year. You know, we were talking about tools, and Thomas, you know, to peel back the curtain a little bit, I remember we shelved an article on tools. So yeah, we should put that one out there. And then like the salary stuff, there are salary calculators out there. People find this really helpful in their job search, where you can kind of plug in, okay, this is you know, my years of experience, my location, this is where, you know, my education is. And you can get a range of salaries that maybe you should target in your job search. I think we can use the salary data for something like that. But yeah, I would love to hear, you know, from you all here attending today, if you have any ideas, you know, look into this, or we'd love to learn more about this. That'll be helpful for us.
Awesome. And you can find Lawton and Thomas on drillbitlabs.com and also on Twitter and LinkedIn. They're both super active there, and make sure you sign up for their newsletter. I just want to say thanks for both of you for sharing this. This is freaking awesome. Like, such a gift to the community. Really looking forward to seeing the next version of it. And yeah, sign up at depth.drillbitlabs.com to get onto that newsletter. It is well worth your time. I read pretty much every single one. And if you want to find out more about Great Question and why we believe we're changing the paradigm for UX research, particularly when it comes to democratizing UX research at scale, check out greatquestion.co. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you all next time. And if you like this, give us a shout out somewhere, maybe on Twitter, maybe on LinkedIn, something like that, and then we'll do more of them. That'll be good reason. Make sure you tag Lawton and Thomas.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. It's been a blast.
Thanks, team. Bye.